video we will discuss regarding constructor in C sharp. Okay, what is constructor? Let's see what is constructor. Constructor. It is a special type of method that is come under the class. Constructor is a special type of method that come under the class. Constructor is a part of class. Constructor is a member of class. Okay. And second point is constructor. It is a special type of method that come under the class. Is constructor is a part of class. Constructor is a member of class. And constructor, because constructor is special type of method, show constructor name. Constructor name is name must be same as class name. Constructor name must be same as class name. Whatever the class name, under that the constructor name is same name as the class name. Okay, this is the second point. And constructor is non-value returning non-value returning method. Constructor is a special type of class, a special type of method. Constructor is a special type of method. So each and every method have some return type, but constructor is non-value returning method. Okay. Suppose a method returns some value, integer, string, boolean, like that, and that if the method doesn't return anything, then we can declare as void. But in this case of constructor, this is a special method, so we can't use void. Constructor is first non-value returning method. Okay. What is the syntax for the constructor? Syntax to declare a constructor, that is modifier, constructor name, parameter list, meter list, statements, 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 multiple statements. This is the syntax of the constructor. Okay. And the constructor is a special method that come under the class. The constructor is a part of member of a class. Suppose we have a class and this name is test. Then we can define a constructor like this: public test. Like this we can define constructor. Okay, like this we define a constructor. Class name is test and the constructor name is test. This is the public modifier, parameterless. Like that we can declare we can define a constructor. Okay, what is the use of constructor? What is the use of constructor? Constructor are used to initialize the variables of a particular class. Constructor is used. Constructor constructor is used to init- initialize initialize the variable, or we can say fields of class. Constructor is used to initialize the variable or fields of the class. Okay, to initialize variable variable of class, we need to call to initialize variable of class, we need to call the constructor. Constructor. To initialize variable of class, we need to call the constructor. Okay. Each and every class each and every class have constructor. Each and every class have constructor. If if programmer defined a constructor into class, then that is called explicit constructor. Each and every class have constructor. If programmer defined a constructor into class, then that is called explicit constructor. Suppose in a class, suppose we have a class. For example, we have a class. For example, we have a class test demo. We have a class, and this class have int I like this, and I have instantiated this class. We have created the instance of this class demo d equal to new test demo like this. We define a class, just name with test demo, and we declare a variable of integer type I. Okay, there is no constructor defined here, but I have mentioned that each and every class have constructor. Okay, each and every class have constructor. Okay, this is mandatory. This is mandatory. This is mandatory. Each and every class have constructor, but and you can't create the instance if there is no constructor. You can't but here what happening, if programmer defined a constructor into class, then that is called explicit constructor. But if the programmer doesn't define a constructor within the class, then the compiler define a constructor. Then the compiler define a constructor like this. The compiler define a constructor public this, and initialize this I as default value I equal to 0. Okay, if we don't define a constructor within a class, then automatically implicit constructor is defined. Implicit, this is implicit constructor. Implicit constructor defined by the compiler. Okay, if the programmer, this is public, if the programmer not defined any constructor in a class, then it's the responsibility of the compiler to define a implicit constructor. This is implicit constructor, and this is parameterless constructor. Okay, this is parameterless constructor. Okay, and this initialize the variables with default value. Okay, this implicit constructor is called as parameterless constructor. Each and every class have constructor. If programmer define a constructor into the class, then that is called explicit constructor. If programmer not defined a constructor in the class, then compiler defined implicit constructor cons- constructor that is called as default constructor. That is called if a programmer not define a constructor in the class, then compiler define implicit constructor that is called as default constructor. Why default constructor? Because this constructor is implicit constructor, that is parameterless constructor, or also called as or also called as parameterless constructor. So called as parameterless constructor, and the default constructor or parameterless constructor or implicit constructor that is defined by the compiler is always initialize the variable with default value. Okay, the integer default value is 0. Suppose we have bool b, then its default value is b equal to false, then its default value is false. And suppose we have a string s, then a string default value is null, s equal to null, like this. Because this constructor is parameterless constructor, and that is called as default constructor also because it initializes the variable with default value. Okay, this is parameterless constructor. It's define is initialize the variable with the default values. Okay, this is the implicit constructor. That's why suppose here I am saying I said that I already said that if you want to create the instance of the particular class test demo, then you can't create the instance without constructor. If the constructor is not defined by the programmer, then implicit constructor defined by the compiler. That's why we are able to uh, here we have defined the compiler. Here compiler defined implicit constructor. This is I have done, I have not defined this constructor. This is implicitly defined, and the implicit constructor initialize the value with default value. Okay, I all the integer have default value is 0, boolean default value is false, and every reference type default value is null. Okay, that is that why it's valid statement. Why it's valid statement? Because when we create the instance of test demo class, and the test demo class haven't the constructor, because in test demo there is no constructor, so we can say that this is not valid statement, because uh, every class must have a constructor. If there is no constructor, then we can't create the instance of that particular class. And here we don't have the constructor. But if there is no constructor defined explicitly, then compiler define implicitly the constructor and with default values. Okay, that's why we are able to create the instance of this test demo, because here there was no any explicit constructor. This is defined by the compiler, and this test demo, that's why test demo hold a constructor, and that's why this is the valid statement, because this test class have the constructor, either implicit or explicit, but we have the constructor, right? defining defining the constructor may be implicit, it may be implicit, or it may be explicit. It may be explicit, but calling is always explicit. Okay, explicit. Defining constructor is, it can be implicit or explicit. Here constructor is implicit constructor. We have not defined any constructor. This is implicit constructor. If you in a class, if you define a constructor, that is, if the programmer define a constructor, that is called explicit constructor. If the programmer doesn't define a constructor, that is then the compiler define the constructor, that is implicit constructor. But in every case constructor is available either in explicit or implicit. Okay, but in the case of calling, only explicit calling is required. We can't implicit call the constructor. Okay, here we call the explicit constructor. Here this is the test demo is the constructor. We are calling the constructor, explicitly calling the constructor. When we creating the instance, then explicitly calling the constructor. This constructor is called, and the constructor initialize the variables. Okay, and the constructor initialize the allocate the memory, allocate the instance, and in that instance these all are available, and that instance object reference variable is assigned in D. Okay, like we can see. Okay, now we can see practical implementation of these things. I have created a constructor demo project. Okay, this is the class with the name program. When we have declare a integer variable I, bool b, and a string s, Okay, this is the class, and this class program class have I have didn't define any constructor for this class. Okay, I didn't define any constructor for the class program. Okay, then what will happen? Every class have the constructor, but I didn't define the constructor for this program class. Then the compiler define the constructor of the program class and assign the default value of I, default value of B, default value of S. Every integer type have default value is 0, and boolean type default value is false, and a reference type default value is null. So I will create the instance of the program class. Suppose I am creating here program p equal to new program. This is calling the implicit constructor. This statement here, new program calling the implicit constructor. Okay, this is the calling is explicit. Calling is explicit. We can call. So here we are calling explicitly the constructor, but here we calling the implicit constructor. This is the explicit. Calling is explicit. We need to write this one explicitly. But the in this class we don't have any constructor. Okay, then our compiler will define a parameterless constructor or default constructor for this in this case. Okay, and we are calling explicitly that constructor. Okay, and the default constructor will initialize this fields variables with default value. Okay, then we will print value of I plus e dot I. I have written for B plus C, and this statement to hold the output screen. P dot I, P dot B, and P dot S. Okay, value of I, value of B, value of S. We are calling X constructor is a constructor here. Explicit constructor is called, and we don't have the constructor. Programmer haven't defined a constructor, so the compiler will define parameterless or default constructor and initialize these variable with default value. So this is as I is assigned is 0, means i's default value is 0 printed, and boolean default value is false printed, and this default value is null printed. So we'll see this. Value of I is 0, value of B is false, value of S is null. Null, this CMD prompt is unable to show the null. Okay. And another scenario we can see, suppose add a new class, new item. Here we can add a constructor demo. Constructor demo, we have create a new class with constructor demo, and suppose we have this is here in this implicit constructor is defined by the compiler. There is no constructor for the class program, but the implicit constructor, in case if the programmer not define any constructor, then it must be the class have any constructor, implicit or explicit. Suppose you have defined 100 class, and you haven't defined any constructor in that, then the default constructor will be created implicitly by the compiler for each and every, for 100 classes. Default constructor will be created by the compiler. Okay, here we have seen the implicit constructor, and here we will see the explicit constructor. Okay, explicit constructor means if the programmer defined explicitly the constructor, that is called explicit constructor. Here in this, programmer doesn't define any constructor, then that is implicit constructor, that is internally defined by the compiler. So here we will define a constructor. Okay. What is the syntax to define constructor? Public modifier name and the class name. Constructor name is same as the class name. like this we have defined. This is the constructor. Okay, constructor is special method within the class that's name is same as the class name. Public, this is the modifier, this is the constructor name, and this is a constructor is non-value returning, so I didn't use anything. And this is the parameterless constructor. We can create parameterized constructor or parameterless constructor. Explicitly, we can do anything. We can define a parameterless or parameterized constructor, no problem. But in the case of implicit constructor, when we didn't define any constructor in a class, then the compiler will always define a parameterless constructor implicitly. Okay. This is the constructor, and I have printed console dot write line constructor. Constructor is called explicit constructor is called explicit constructor is called. This is the class constructor demo. In this we have a special method that is called constructor. Okay, and constructor I have print in constructor. I have write a statement console.write line to print constructor explicit constructor is called. Okay. Now public static void main. Public static void main. This is the main entry point. The main is the entry point of the program. Okay. This is the entry point. From here the execution is started. Okay. From here the execution is started. Main is the entry point. Okay, in this I have created the instance of the customer constructor demo. This is the customer constructor demo. This is the class, so I have created the instance of the constructor demo class. So constructor demo instance name is suppose C, we can do, and this is the constructor demo. The explicit constructor, here we are calling the constructor explicitly. This is the explicit call of the constructor. Okay, when we are creating the instance, then at the same time constructor is called. When we creating the instance of a particular class constructor demo, then at the same time we are calling the constructor. We are calling the constructor. In the constructor, currently we are printing something, but we can initialize the data members or member or fields of a class constructor demo using constructor. Okay, using constructor we can initialize the variable of a class. Here we are just printing this message. When we create the instance of a particular class customer demo, then in this case, in this statement, we are just calling the constructor. Explicitly, we are calling the constructor. And the constructor, what will do? The constructor will print this message. Okay. Every time when we create the instance of the customer constructor demo, every time the constructor will be called. No need to call. Every time when we create the instance of the customer demo class, then every time this constructor demo is called, means this constructor automatically called. Okay, suppose I have created instance, first instance C1, second C2, third one C3. I have created three instances like 1, 2, 3. Okay, console dot read line to hold the output screen. Just wait for input. Okay, here I have created three instances of the customer demo class. Then automatically this constructor will called three times. Okay, let's see what happened. Why this error came? Program has more than one entry point defined. I have already told that main is the entry point. Main is the entry point. From here the execution start. From here the program start the execution. Because here what's why program has more than one entry point. We have main method here and we have main method here also. Though so the execution engine confused that from where we can start, from where I need to start. The conflict occur. Okay, the conflict occur because this one is also entry point, this one is also entry point. Then where we need to start, this is the conflict occur. That's why it's saying that program has more than one entry point. Compile with main to specify the type contains entry point. Means just define which main we need to execute, from which entry point we need to go. Okay. So currently we have two entry point, this one and this one. So to fix this one, I need to, if I want to run this one constructor demo under namespace constructor demo, I want to run the constructor demo class. Currently here in this namespace is constructor demo and the class is program. I want to run not this one, constructor demo, and this is the program class, but I want to run this constructor demo namespace and want to run this constructor demo class. Okay, then double click on the properties and in startup object we just you can set constructor demo dot program and constructor demo dot constructor demo. This you can set and you can run. Explicit constructor is called, explicit constructor is called, and implicit constructor is called. Three times here we have created the instance of the customer demo class three times. So three times this constructor is calling. Okay, suppose we have breakpoint to understand how the execution happen. Then you can see start, the breakpoint came here in the main. This is the main entry point. The execution start here, and we just this is executed. Yes, if you want to check step by step things, then this one is coming and go to the, okay, here also we need to, okay, the first when we create the first instance of the particular constructor demo class, then the constructor is called and executing this line. Then again come to the second instance creation. After that go to the constructor, then come execute the constructor and came to the third line, and after that this again go to the constructor, execute the constructor body and came to here. Means every time the instance of the class is created, every time the constructor is called. Okay. I think you got the you understand, you got the point regarding constructor, how the constructor is executing, what is the role of the constructor. Okay. And next video, I will show you the parameterized constructor and regarding chaining of the constructor, everything I will show you. This is the initial, this is the first video of the constructor. So in next video, I will show you the parameterized constructor and all about the constructor. Okay, that's all. Thank you.